Hello, BookTube. Well, it's a pretty dark and dreary day here in Cleveland, which I can't say is atypical for Cleveland, Ohio. But it is pretty fitting weather for the book I wanted to talk about today, which is Katherine Ann Porter and her collection of 3 short novels called Pale Horse, Pale Rider. I would call them novellas, but apparently Katherine Ann Porter didn't like that word, so I will restrain myself from calling them that, although I personally don't see what's wrong with the term novella. I think it's kind of nice, but she would prefer me to call them short novels, so I'll call them short novels. Immediately, Katherine Ann Porter, before I get ahead of myself, hailed from Texas. So these are Southern. They're kind of gothic. They remind me a little bit of Flannery O'Connor. Actually, a lot of it about Flannery O'Connor, which is a huge compliment because I love Flannery O'Connor. Flannery O'Connor is a little bit more morbid, I think, than Katherine Ann Porter is. But they both exercise a really tight control over their language and their writing, which I really appreciate. And again, there is a kind of, Southern Gothic aspect to both of them. I think that's more pronounced in Flannery O'Connor, but it's definitely here in Katherine Ann Porter as well. I hadn't actually heard of Katherine Ann Porter before, but I was sort of turned on to her because I'm doing Randy Ray's Lone Star Book Club this year, and later this year we'll be reading the collected stories of Katherine Ann Porter, and so I was intrigued, and I looked into her, and I found this beautiful edition of Pale Horse and Pale Rider from Hardcore Brace, modern classic. And I've mentioned it in a couple other videos, but I will be trying to collect all of these. I absolutely love them, and this is a joy to read from. So next month you'll see I've already added to the pile 2 more of them for for next month's TBR. But regardless, I did think when I heard that title, Pale Horse, Pale Rider, I did think of that painting, Death on a Pale Horse by Albert Pinkman Ryder, I think is his name, and we actually have that painting over at the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is why I know about it. But definitely, that painting features a pale horse and a pale rider, so that's what came to mind right away. But the name actually comes from a song, kind of a folk hymn, which I think is very dramatically and fittingly employed in the short novella. And so that title was very fitting, I think, also for the collection as a whole. It makes a lot of sense. But basically, these 3 short novels are, they're not necessarily all connected with each other in any sort of overt way. Clearly, the last story, which is Pale Horse, Pale Rider, is the most autobiographical. That short novel features a character that works the same job that Katherine Ann Porter did, and it's also a very cerebral story about the Spanish flu, which Katherine Ann Porter apparently had at a certain point in her life. So it is very autobiographical in that way, and it's also sort of a sad reflection and meditation on World War I, which was happening in concert with the Spanish flu, or the influenza epidemic, as I think it's more accurately termed. Definitely, I would say out of the 3 stories, I'll give you the title of the other 2. The first one's called Old Mortality, and the second one is called Noon Wine. I would definitely say that Pale Horse, Pale Rider is my favorite of the 3 stories. Katherine Ann Porter's description of this sort of delirium that besets a person who is almost about to die, and is in fact rescued from the brink of death from the Spanish flu, is extremely, it was just really well done. I'm blanking on the term that I would use, but it's definitely, like I said, it is cerebral in the sense that it puts you in this sort of hallucinatory place that Miranda, I believe that's the main character's name in that story, is in as she is fighting against this illness that's threatening to save her life. But there's also her love interest, Adam, who is going to be sent over to fight in World War One. And this love story, which is really the most sensual part of this entire volume, is really, really effective. She really does do a good job of making that relationship seem, very sincere and very special, and I really enjoyed reading that part of the short story as well. The other two I thought were really interesting as well, though I will say I think that Noon Wine is my least favorite story of the three here, just because it's the most depressive, nihilistic of the bunch. I don't mind a nihilistic or depressive story, but this one really got to me for some reason. It has a sort of schizophrenic angle to it that I found pretty disturbing, actually. By the end of the story, you feel like you're kind of going crazy yourself in a way. And there is a sort of psychoanalytic lens that you could use when you're talking about the story. Certainly, there's some things you could say about the ego or the id, or a sort of a dark reflection of a person's psyche being embodied by this sort of malevolent figure that the main character is immediately sort of suspicious of and very hostile to. So definitely it renders that reading, if you want to go in that direction. If you want to, I don't typically like reading my fiction like that. I just kind of like to enjoy it and see it unfold the way that it wants to and the way that I think that the author is intending it to. But there is a way of reading a lot of these stories like that as well. And I would say that more specifically the first two stories, especially Old Mortality, they did remind me of Raymond Carver, not Chandler. Not Chandler, but Raymond Carver. It did remind me of Raymond Carver because I think in both cases there's this sort of reflection on the fact that behaviors and oftentimes conform to a kind of pattern. One thing leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, but ultimately these things are actually in a big circle, and they come back upon themselves at the beginning. Noon Wine is about a murder that leads to a murder that leads to a murder that leads to a murder, and Old Mortality is about a person who I would imagine is similar to Katherine Ann Porter, although I can't say for certain, but a person that does resemble, at least her biography, at least a little bit, somebody who can't be caged down, somebody who's a free spirit, but everybody wants to control them. And then this person is eventually reincarnated in a way in another character in the story. And so it does create this sort of like cyclical feeling to it. In the sense that this person and their personality can't die or can't get expunged, or it's impossible to really erase them. Overall, I definitely recommend this volume, and I recommend it in this Hardcore Brace edition. I don't know if there are other editions of it, but I would definitely recommend this one. I think it's great to read from. I had a lot of fun with it, or reading from this edition specifically. The stories aren't exactly fun, but they are definitely interesting, and I appreciate Katherine Ann Porter's, control over her language, control over the things that she's saying throughout these short novels, and I definitely give it a recommend. So that's it for today. Thank you, BookTube.